All right, welcome back to what will be our last edition for this product management book club in our discussion of product operations. And we're closing in here on the end of the book. So last week we kind of finished up the main part of the book. We were talking about the future of product operations and different ways you could implement it at your organization. And now we've gotten to the part where we're talking about some lessons learned. We're looking at kind of an overview, and then we're going to look at the roadmaps that they gave us at the end of the book, which I love. Flipped through them and I thought, what a great resource to summarize the book and to be a really quick reference when you're in your product ops journey. Because I don't know about you, Michael, but a lot of times when I'm like, oh, there was that really good idea from that book, but I don't have time to reread the entire book and figure out where it was. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh no, I was just giving
Oh,
some
okay.
background instructions there, so we're good.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. So when we're talking about lessons learned, what they chose to focus on is a couple of themes that they said come up frequently throughout it, which I thought was interesting. Sometimes once you get into the end section, they just basically do a quick overview of each chapter. And here we're really looking at those threads that we saw show up in all of the chapters. So if you remember from our previous discussions, we talked about the three pillars of product operations. We talked about getting buy-in from stakeholders. We talked about how to stand up that org within the company. And so some of the themes that they talk about here that go throughout are securing executive support. So like, how do you get the C-suite on board? Why is that so important? Because usually they're the ones that can authorize either you as an individual switching to product ops, or once you've moved on, getting that second hire. Another point they have is focusing on all the data, and it's not highlighted here, but in a couple of the other ones they have it like bolded or in all caps. So not just the data that often teams focus on, those key KPIs that maybe are defined by the C-suite or for your team, but they're saying all data, get insights from the places that maybe other teams aren't looking at. Culture counts. I thought this was interesting. It looks like they're talking less about company culture and more about the culture surrounding product operations. So, what do people think about product operations? How do they approach product? And how do we make product kind of more palatable? So, in my head, I was kind of like, okay, they're saying culture counts. I'm kind of translating in my head to full company buy in, not just leadership. Uh, then the last two they have here, getting to impact quickly. So we talked about, those easy, quick wins, which they highlight there, and then balance process with agility. So that I think is tying back into that idea of not doing process for process's sake. So making sure we're lightening any processes, not necessarily always adding, but taking away can be powerful too. And how do we continue to build out process, but never slow down our team? So, anything that we add, we want to make sure that it's not creating obstacles for our product managers, even if we know in the long run, like, that's going to be great for the team. We think that this is going to have long run benefits, but if nobody adopts it, you know, we're not going to help us out much. So, the rest of the sections just elaborate more on that. I'm looking through here to see if there were any, keynotes. Um, oh, telling the story about product operations. They said that that's huge. We know that storytelling is huge in product management, and so really crafting that story about product operations. And I think there's kind of two key parts of that. One is making sure that people know that product ops is support for product managers. No one's taking over the PM's job. No one's telling PMs like what to do. You're really there, kind of like a pit crew when you're racing, right? Like they're there to make sure that the race car and the race car driver have the best chance of success. They might tell you what to do at certain points, tell you when to come in, tell you to do different stuff, but the whole purpose is to support them. So making sure people know that product ops is for support, and then talking about the value of product ops. So this is something that they talk about a lot in this lessons learned section, is how you communicate the value is is really important. So, in order to have this function stay a part of the org, continue to be supported, especially by leadership, you have to be able to communicate those wins, especially because they're often not tied directly to revenue. Like they mention in here that it's really easy for, sales team, marketing team, you can easily translate their wins into monetary benefits for the company. But a lot of times in product ops, we're facilitating, right? We're making people's jobs easier. We're doing things that probably have long-term benefits. So they're saying, make sure you can find a way to tie that to revenue to explain your impact and to continue explaining your impact over time. So they mentioned that, you know, even if you know your impact, you're going to have a great impact in a year, month to month, what can you be showing different stakeholders, PMs, leadership? How can you be showing them that product op is making progress month over month? And I think that's a really key point because even if you understand that you're having an impact, if other people don't, not very helpful. You're probably not going to get that buy-in. And one of the things they mention is, with a lot of tech companies slimming down, especially now, we know like any ancillary functions are the first to go. So making sure people understand product ops is valuable. This is how it's helping.
Excellent points.
Thanks. Yeah, and so just kind of flipping through here, let's see if there's anything um else that they were talking about. They talk a lot about product ops facilitating. So, um, you know, a lot of times we think about product management and product operations at being at the kind of the center of a network within an organization. And they said one of the key functions is kind of like helping those departments get along. And I know we talk a lot about communicating between those departments, but I
Right.
like the idea of also taking on a little bit of ownership and saying, how can we not only manage communications, but also help manage those relationships? So, like, if sales and product aren't getting along, maybe there's something we can do to help. Probably, I feel like in 90% of cases, often miscommunication, people aren't exactly seeing eye to eye, and that's where product ops should specialize. Um, so really like that they called that out. Um, Yep, and I think we talked about agility, not creating blockers when we're creating processes. Oh, and then one tool that I loved, this is on page 234, right at the end of this lessons learned section.
Mhm.
Um, in order to stop just, processes on top of processes, um, one of these product ops leaders had a system where every quarter they would do a process and tool review, and leadership would rank every process on a scale of 1 to 10. So most helpful to least helpful. And then they could decide which ones they wanted to keep, which ones they wanted to toss out, and which ones they wanted to reevaluate. And I've never seen that happen before at an org for processes, and I love that. I 100%
That
will be
is,
stealing that.
yeah, because a lot of times you get into organizations and it's like, this is what we're using, this is what we're doing, learn it, adopt it. And that review is very, very important, very powerful. Because I can imagine the number of times, or I can just think of, recall, maybe that's the term, the number of times we've been in and we've used tools and they've it's just been their legacy for a long period of time. And the initiatives that are happening at that moment in time, particularly the dynamics of these cross-functional teams and departments, when you talk about operations and
Mhm.
with agility and that kind of thing, there may be a better way. There might be a more optimized way to go about it and approach it, and different sets of tools to implement in order to realize the outcomes. And it never necessarily gets entertained. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
in many organizations, they will tell you, hey, this is, the Bible of what we do here.
Yeah.
So there's just no point in considering anything else, even though there may be something possibly better. But this is how we do it. This is what we use. This we've been doing it for years. And to go
Yes.
back and kind of have a scenario where you say, well, you know what, let's look at that. Let's do an inventory. Let's take stock. Let's see if this is still relevant for our situation, or if we need to pivot. Is phenomenal. It's a
Yeah.
great concept.
Yeah, and I like the fact that what you're describing to me sounds so much like that idea of in product management when you're not tying yourself to a solution, you're always trying to keep it open, keeping the idea of iteration, continuously flowing so you don't get stuck in any one area. So I feel like it's a very product aligned concept. Um, and then also just
Yeah.
as far as working also for buy-in and for, we talked about people being discontented with the process and things like that. Like, this is a great tool because I feel like a lot of times people get frustrated with the processes, and that's one of the key things that will start breaking down and people feel like they don't have a voice. So great to bake that in. So, multi-purpose.
Yeah. And it's really very agile too, because honestly, and they talked about agility here a little bit a page ago when you run past that. A lot of times people throw that term around because it's like a fancy term or it's like
Mm,
in vogue right now.
yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
like AI or cybersecurity. You got some
Mhm.
of these terms that just like people like to hear.
Yeah.
And but not always is it actually being practiced in its raw sense. And
Mhm.
what they're really describing here is really very agile. They're saying, hey, why don't we actually do this?
Yeah.
What a concept, right? Because it does have value, and to put it into the ecosystem and say this is important, let's make it part of our culture and the way that we're doing things is very very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. All right. So, moving on from that section, the very last section is called Your Roadmap to Change. And here we're kind of doing something similar, but they're saying, what are our four key takeaways for activating product operations? So, I think they chose the activating because then it can work for either you have some semblance of product ops that you want to get going, or you're starting from scratch. Um, so, they have a couple of topics here. One, they say product operations is a force multiplier at organizations of any size. So even though technically, we think of this as more of a scale up method that, it can be useful at many different stages depending on the problems that you're seeing. And I know we talked about before, they gave us different categories to start off with based on different challenges that you might see at your org. But regardless of where you are, that whole idea of, you know, product operations are allowing other people to do their jobs better. So there to support, there to make it more efficient, to make it more effective, um, and yeah, that just being a good way to explain it and explain the value to different people. Then they talk a little bit about,
Absolutely.
yeah. They talk about the three pillars of product operations can provide a helpful framework. Um, and this was kind of interesting because I feel like they're almost talking about why they defined it in this way. As they talk about the rule of threes, that being easier to remember. And I know they talked about this being a good communication tool when you're trying to explain how product ops will function, different um, areas of the org that you might, try to attack and improve. Um, so, good reminder of that. They also mentioned define how you'll measure your success. And I think this is really important because we talked about defining those wins, showing your impact, and it's difficult to do that when you are supporting another because you can't exactly just adopt the metrics of the organization you're helping. So you really have to look for like the rate of change. So, how much more quickly are your product managers able to find the information they need and stuff like that, and like how does this connect to other business metrics? So it's nice they give us a couple of examples here on different ways that we can measure effectiveness, waste, value, um, which is nice because I think that's always a challenge, and I think like we talked about before, if you can't measure it, you can't really succeed at it. So I think I'm butchering that quote, but
But
something along
that's
those
pretty
lines.
much that sums it up. And as you're saying, what's really beautiful about this, they're saying measuring your success too, because sometimes there are these industry metrics or KPIs or OKRs, whatever you're using, and you're trying to fit a round hole into a square peg. And they're
Mm,
very deliberate about using these pillars you talked about, the business and the data insights, the customer and market insights, the processes and practices. You want to kind of make sure you're pulling out and you're tailoring according to your specific organizational, in this case, operational needs and objectives. And they break it down to different levels, even which you're getting ready to go into with the organizational, product operations teams level, the
mhm.
very specific initiative levels, and so forth. So now this really becomes very useful and relevant data points as you're measuring. your
Yeah.
success.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And they talk about qualitative versus quantitative. So really, like you were saying, enabling you to, and I think they do this throughout the book, enabling you to tailor it to your specific situation. Because I think one point that gets hammered home again and again in this book is that product ops has to be tailored to your org. Like there is no like product ops in a box that you take out and it's ready to go. Like it's very much find the problem, find the pain point, find the solution that works for you, find the method, the implementation that works for you. So yeah, I
Yeah,
like
they're
the point
big
there.
on reinforcing that here, right? And it's a little different because when you find a lot of the other methodologies and frameworks that are out there, and I can really think back to doing a lot of agile implementations. And
Hmm.
if companies are coming from a traditional waterfall, they're like, "We need a solution." Ta-da! Here comes agile, and they're like, "Well, what are you going to do? Like, how's this agile thing going to work?" Almost like this, but you're saying a magic wand. We're just going to bring this like 10-step process, whatever it is,
Hmm.
and just cover your organization with it, or pivot the way that you're doing things, and all of a sudden there'll be transformation.
Yeah.
And of course, people who are even coming into the practice of it, they say, well, and it could be in any of these frameworks and methodologies because they have a construct for how they all work,
Hmm.
and people kind of robotically remember them because they're saying, well, okay, if I'm going to do agile, I can remember just doing a class the other day. They say, well, how long is a sprint? They were solving a problem. Well, a sprint's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks. And
Hmm.
I couldn't, we had to step back and say, well, it can be what they're saying. It can be from 1 to 5 or whatever it is. Different books give
Yeah.
you different frameworks,
Hmm.
but it's not always 2 weeks, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it's a conversation amongst this cross-functional team. The team kind of decides what the capacity is, and how quickly you want to deliver value. And then
Hmm.
based on that, there's a conversation, and the general rule is, the framework that you're given. And they're
Yeah.
very poignant here about consistently pointing out this flexibility that exists, and the fact that you do want to take these data points and this methodology, this framework, this approach, and look at your situation, look at the dynamics in your organization, look at the data points, look at the tools, look at all of these moving parts, and they're
Hmm.
rolling up from all these other places because we're talking about operations. So operations, of course, is the embodiment of these other silos,
Hmm.
and each of these silos are kind of operating efficiently in their own little way. But you
Hmm.
got to kind of roll that up and somehow identify and pull out what's relevant at this larger level, this operational level, from these little silos, and
Yeah.
make it functional at this higher level.
Hmm.
And that can be different from one engagement, even within an organization, from one engagement to another. And they're reinforcing the fact that we want to be mindful of that every step of the way, and,
Yeah.
and make those customizations as we go along. Keep that like front of mind as we're pushing through.
Yeah, and I think I really like that you mentioned that because I feel like that's, aside from product ops, if we're just stepping back for a minute, that battle and that balance between wanting to have something that's easy to remember and easy to define, and then being able to work with it. Because I feel like there's like we read the book Sprint, and to me that was so like, they allow for some customization, but very step by step, super clear cut, like, here's what you do and stuff like that. And then um on the other side, to have something so open ended, you can use it a lot of different ways, and it makes me wonder, like, are you better off, like, I think once you're a frequent practitioner or something, it's a lot easier to
Yeah.
be able to adjust and still hit those targets. But I wonder, like, as a beginner in these practices, is it better to come with that ultra flexible mindset, or is it better to have like some kind of a rigid framework just so you can like hammer in those points and then later start to bend it? So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it definitely is. I would say more often than not the latter.
Mm,
And this is just from doing a lot of agile and scaled agile, and kind of product, which has a lot of agile into it implementations. Because if you don't do kind of the let's have a bit of a framework first, we can understand how this thing works.
mhm,
It's almost like trying to create a paragraph, like somebody says, you're going to just learn English for the first time.
mm,
And okay, go ahead and write a book. Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. I
Yeah.
need to know A is for apple first. And of course, even with that, there's so many rules of grammar that you can have, a word with a prefix and the same suffix and, change the letter in front and all of a sudden the word changes. So you got to learn those rules, right? The rules of engagement first.
Mhm.
And then you can start getting fancy with it, right? You,
Yeah.
you get on a bike and start riding. The first step is just learn how to pedal and stay on without falling off.
Mhm.
And after that, you can start popping wheelies and, doing these other things.
Alright, alright. Seems like a rapid evolution, but okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. And just to finish up this section, I underlined this because I thought it was just a important note. When embarking on this journey, rule number one is patience. So I feel like, maybe we
Patience.
get into the mindset of, yeah, like let's roll this thing out, um, let's get started. And yeah, they're just saying, be patient with it. This is something that develops over time. Don't stick it on the back burner, but also recognize that this is something you'll have to work at. You have to build that product operations culture. You have to build those cross-functional connections and support and things like that. And I think this makes a strong case for kind of like grassroots support and gathering momentum and buy-in, and why a lot of times I think they talk about, you being the first product ops person and you're kind of like embarking on this on your own, and then you start to like build out the team and stuff. Like it makes sense that it's, not something that usually comes top down. It's usually something that kind of starts with a passionate person about it. Um and they're the ones who bring it forward. So
Again, another great parallel to agile because a lot of times when we go into transformations with that, and this has a lot of agile built into it. It's one reason why I
mhm,
keep kind of drawing a parallel. We actually just say right up front, you know what, for at least 6 months, minimum three, but 6 months, don't expect any major transformation because
mm,
it just takes that long to get, for everybody, for a culture to develop around it.
mhm.
And but people do come in when you're doing a transformation kind of expecting and I guess hoping for like a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to see something in like 30 days so that
Yeah,
way we
results,
know.
results.
And it's kind of, you got to really set that expectation. So your point about patience
Mhm,
and the one that they're making here becomes, I think, paramount. You almost want to kind of come out the gate, setting that level setting right away
mhm.
that, you want to have a mindset around that because there's absolutely no way any transformation, especially this massive, we're talking about operational, this is not
Yeah.
a small thing.
Mhm.
It's going to be very difficult to see an impact in a short period of time. And if that's not really that mindset's not set out front, people can get very frustrated and disappointed early. And
Yeah,
then you've got a culture that's not going to, really buy into it in the long run, and you won't get those results. So patience is
yeah.
very important.
Yeah, and I think that to me, that's one of the biggest challenges here is the balance of letting people know the value of product operations, but not setting the expectation too high that they expect results immediately and then don't see them. Like I think that's because on one hand, like you want to promise it's going to be great because you want them to see that, but
Yeah.
yeah, also knowing operationally how slow things can move and how you know obstacles can set you back easily and stuff like that. I think that's the hardest
Yeah.
practical point.
Yep. Setting expectations. And it's good they point that out because even those who say are going to kind of lead this transformation,
Hmm.
um, I think you want to set that mind, put that out there up front. And it's a balancing act, like you say, because on one
Hmm.
sense, a lot of times when people are making these transformation, there's a pain point there. And
Yeah.
it's like, we need to do something about this like right away. Okay, what's the solution? Okay, we
Hmm.
heard this thing over here is great, agile, product operations, whatever it is. Let's go with it. We
Yeah.
got to turn this thing around immediately.
Yeah.
And of course, you do want people to understand, the culture to understand that this is going to, move us in that direction.
Hmm.
But you got to be realistic in those expectations and not set up for failure if you don't, right?
Yeah.
Get people kind of understanding that this is going to be a process.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I actually think that's a really good segue into the last resource that they share in this book, the roadmaps, because I think this is a really good way to make sure that you're working through that important like discovery phase and like expectation setting and like all of that because they I think they break it down really nicely into like what you need to investigate and like some leads to start off with. So I think that kind of just following the roadmap that kind of keeps you from jumping too far ahead too quickly and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Always good to have a roadmap, right? So you know where you're
yes,
going, how you're
yeah,
going to
yeah,
get
no,
there.
absolutely, and like especially like this, like concise, um, lot of info here, but kind of packaged in an easy to digest way. We love our diagrams. Great diagram.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Graphic, the visuals, and we got that one from um what was the one we did that was talking about, oh, getting back? Remember the getting back
Yeah,
one?
yeah, get back.
So
That's
they had
good.
a lot of nice visuals and that type of thing in there because they were really emphasizing so many ways to articulate this message. And
Mhm.
even though ultimately in that roadmap it was about let's get some support here, uh, just communicating visually as they've
Mhm.
done here pretty well. And this roadmap is phenomenal. Standing up the product operations team for the first time, uh, evaluating your current product operations functions step by step. It's almost like you're playing a fun game, right?
Yeah, it does give a Monopoly-esque or yeah, more Candyland, I guess, with the but yeah, yeah, and I honestly think this is just kind of nice as a review of the book too, because I think all of the things that they really pointed out as being important to product ops and important to the org are kind of already baked in here. So
Oh,
yeah, great
yeah,
book.
this is cool. You can almost just look at this and then go read the book because you're like, okay, I can see where this we kind of what the various steps are along the way.
Yeah.
And of course, for us, we've gone through it. Now we're summarizing. It's a great way to just kind of wrap it up and say, all right, remember all that stuff we just talked about and all these pages we just plowed through? Here's a nice little graphic to just walk you through it.
Yeah.
Pretty
So
cool.
I was gonna say, that being the end of the book, I'd like to ask you, Michael, what was your like number one takeaway from the book? Like, what do you think was something that really stuck with you?
That's a good question because there are really so many little moving parts. But,
Mhm.
I think really is the idea of being able to identify in these complexities those key elements that are going to be relevant for the big picture, the
Mm,
direction that we're trying to really go here. Because again, you're stepping into this with a lot of complexities, and one of them even being is that these silos that you're pulling together up at the operational level
mhm.
may be actually rather efficient in their little domains,
Yeah.
but somehow you got to be able to say, all right, that's good, let's roll it up now, let's filter through all of this
Mhm.
and let's figure out what are these elements, data, tools, everything else that we need to extract from your various silos. And only those things are we going to pull in at these operational levels because those are the core elements that are going to get us, across the goal line here. And we're not saying anything's wrong with this. These other things are working very well for you.
Mhm.
Keep them, keep doing them in your silos. They seem to be working. But at this operational level, we're going to just pull these elements
Mhm.
and fuse them into one cohesive ecosystem
Mhm.
and roll with that. So as an operation, we can get to the destination.
Yeah. So, would you say it sounds kind of like the prioritization if you had to really like sum it up?
Narrow it down to one, I'd say the ability to, yeah, prioritization to take complexities, prioritize, and
Mhm.
streamline them.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That I think kind of sums up the whole goal of product ops. Um, and for me, I think one of the big impactful things of this book was just defining product operations as it relates to product management, because I think that's what stops a lot of companies from implementing this is that they don't understand the difference. And there's not that many resources out there right now that are that are explaining it. So to me, the value in this book, of just explaining what product ops is, it's not product management, but this is why it adds value, I think that's the main value, the main takeaway that I got from this book.
That's a good one because you're right. The minute you hear product, I mean, we're so conditioned with management and owner and these other things
Yeah, yeah.
that you kind of come in with some preconceived notions and you're like, I already know what that is. Right. And
Yeah.
then you're like, well, yeah, bring that with you.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
and here's a distinction here, right? So
Yeah.
that's yeah, very strong point.
Alright, any final thoughts before we, close the book on this one?
I just say this excellent read. I'm not exactly sure that product operations is a one size fits all. That every organization is just going to transform and be much more efficient if you go down the product operations pathway.
Mhm.
But I do see that there will be some use cases where that can be absolutely true, and some of these entities or use cases probably haven't even considered it because they haven't been exposed.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worthy of an interrogation, and even the authors themselves say, "Hey, this isn't for everybody."
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth a look and an analysis to see if it's something that might fit in your ecosystem and with the goals that your organization is looking to accomplish, and worthy of consideration.
Yeah. Absolutely. Alright, well, I think we can, finish up there, so to anyone who's listening, thank you for joining us on this, journey of reading product operations, and, yeah, we'll hopefully be back soon with a new book, discussing a few options now and looking forward to more product discussions.
Yes, so exciting. The product world is amazing. So yeah, let's continue this conversation for sure.
Alright, thank you so much.
Thank you.